It's usually around about this point in most people's lives when they make the first trip to a pub. And Paul was no exception. And joining him on his first trip to the pub was one of his ushers, Michael Cobley. And the pub they chose to go to was called the Hingemaker's Arms. Now, if you were choosing your first public house, the Hingemaker's Arms wouldn't be top of my list. It's quite an old-fashioned boozer, and the people who drink in there are, let's say, characters. So Paul and Mike were quite nervous when they first got to the bar, understandably. What should we order? They wondered. Should we order a pint of lager? Maybe a pint of bitter? Perhaps even cider? I know, they thought. Let's ask for 2 vodka martinis. What on the earth possessed you to order vodka martinis in the Hingemaker's Arms? I'll never know, Paul. I can only assume that they must have thought that it was James Bond. Anyway, I'm pleased to announce they survived that first trip to the pub and eventually did go on to drink normal drinks in normal pubs. Luckily for Paul's credibility, he was in a band around about this time called The Fever, also known as the Zetlins. And here they are, back in the day. There's Paul on the right, alongside John Harding, Paul Harding and their friend Bean. For anyone who never saw The Fever, they were really good. Bass player wasn't much cop-like, but he had some pretty good songs. They were a little bit like some of your modern bands like the Zootons or the Coral, but they were also quite heavily influenced by 60s bands, most notably the Beatles. Now, to say that they modelled themselves on the Beatles would probably be a little bit unfair, but it's definitely fair to say that they definitely all looked up to them. Which is why one of the big highlights for Paul and the other members of the band was when they got the opportunity to play at the Cavern. As you can see, here they are outside the Cavern, and here they are inside. I just hope that Paul didn't order a vodka martini in there. However, Paul didn't actually need to be in a band to be famous at this time in his life, because he was already quite regularly being mistaken for this man. Paul loved it when people said he looked like Tim Henman. I've got a funny feeling that's why he grew the beard. However, it does seem that Paul's previous likeness to the tennis player is still quite a well-known fact. In fact, when I was looking for this picture of Tim Henman on the internet, I came across his Wikipedia site. And on closer inspection, I found this quite interesting fact. There, on Tim Henman's Wikipedia site, in black and white, it says very clearly, he also looks very similar to Yorkshire-based maths teacher Paul Rowlandson. Fancy that, hey? Anyway, whether Paul was going to go on to become a successful musician, or perhaps just a professional lookalike, stroke maths teacher, we all know that the secret to any man's success is the support and love of a good woman. For anyone who isn't familiar with the story of how Paul and Rebecca met, this is how it all began. Paul was at university at the time and was bored of spending all of his time studying or playing the guitar. So one day he decided, I think it's time to go and get myself a girlfriend. So he put down his guitar and off he went into the big wide world looking for love. But of course the big question is, where does a young man go to try and find love these days? And the answer, of course, is jiu-jitsu classes. That's right, in the summer of 2008, Paul decided to join the local jiu-jitsu club. Every week he would go along, pay his subs, learn his moves, and quite frankly, get his backside kicked. But he was enjoying himself, which is the main thing. And what he enjoyed especially was some of their jiu-jitsu nights out. And it was on one of those nights out, when Paul and his friend Scouse Tom were enjoying a quiet drink, that Paul noticed that one of his fellow jiu-jitsuers had a rather attractive friend. And Paul was a little bit shy and didn't quite have the courage to speak to that friend at the moment, but the night was still young and he was building up his Dutch courage. As the evening progressed, people took to the dance floor, where Paul was hoping to impress the mystery girl with some of his moves. But of course, any of us who've ever seen Paul on the dance floor will know that was never going to happen. But that's okay, because the night was still young. Later that night, as everyone left the club, they all moved outside to go and get a taxi. Scouse Tom felt the need to go and hug every last person goodbye, which left Paul on his own and gave him his chance to finally talk to Rebecca. And because he'd had a few drinks, he even built up the courage to ask her for a phone number. And because Becca was drunk, she let him have it. However, what Becca might not know to this day was because Paul was drunk, he couldn't actually remember what her name was. So for the next 2 weeks, Becca's number was stored on Paul's phone as, I think her name is Becky. Luckily, Paul managed to get around that, and before one knew it, they were going on their very first date. To which Paul turned up extremely hungover, and apparently didn't say a word for the first couple of hours, and managed to make a complete fool of himself, to the extent where he probably wondered if he'd ever see Rebecca again. So what happened next, I hear you ask? Well, luckily for Paul, Becca did agree to see him again, and since then I'm sure we'd all go on to agree that they've gone on to become a really lovely couple. They've both graduated from university, they've got themselves a high-rise city centre apartment, and even a new car. Which brings us nicely to Christmas 2010, by which time Paul and Becca had been together for over 2 years. Do you know what, Becca? Said Paul. I'd really like to find a way to show all of our families just how much we love each other. Well, said Becca, I'd quite like to find a way to show all of our families and all of our friends just how much we love each other. Well, said Paul, I'd like to find a way to show all of our families, all of our friends, all of our families' friends, and all of our friends' families just how much we love each other. Well, said Becca, I'd like to find a way to show all of our families, all of our friends, all of our families' friends, all of our friends' families, and people we don't even know just how much we love each other. Well, in that case, said Paul, maybe we should get married. And of course, here we are on a big happy day. Coincidentally, for anyone who's interested in the breakdown of those 5 groups which I've just mentioned, I prepared this rather handy graph. As you can see, the main groups there are very much the family and the friends, but there are some people who do fall into the category of families' friends and friends' families. And even some people who fall into that last group are people we don't know. For the people who are in that category, you know who you are. But of course, we don't. So, 2011 may have been the year of the big royal wedding, but for all of us, it was 2012 that was the important one. And I'm sure you would all like to join me in wishing them a fantastic day and every happiness together in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you the bride and groom. And finally, on behalf of Paul and Becca, I would like to say a big thank you to all of you. Everybody out there who has helped to make this day extra special for them, whether you're family, friends, families' friends, friends' families, or even people they don't know. Thank you for being with them to make it a special day. Hope you enjoyed the day. I'm sure you'll get to see Paul strutting his stuff on the dance floor at some point. And I hope you all have a fantastic time. Thank you for listening to my speech. It's been a pleasure to prepare it for you. And congratulations once again to Paul and Becca. Thank you very much. Goodbye.